The NCAA is changing their redshirt rules, and Boogie Johnson notices Boogie coming back to the Houston Cougars.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, a daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day, making Locked On Cougs the most listened to Houston Cougar podcast out there, and making Locked On Sports Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network in the world. If you're enjoying the conversation down below, tell us in the comments down below what your favorite candy is. We have a lot of candy rewards around the Ainsworth household lately. I got mixed feelings about it, but tell us what you like down below. I want to get into this today. Today's show is brought to you by our good buddies over at Game Time. And today's episode brought to you by Game Time, which is the best place to get into the action, but we got too much fun between now and then. I want to talk to you about Boogie Johnson and if this is a possibility. He took notice on social media. We'll talk about it, we'll break into it, but there is, I guess, a pathway here for Boogie coming back. I also know about the dead period being done in the transfer portal and what that means and who could be coming to the Houston Cougars in the very near future. And then last but not least, I want to hit some about what's changing in the transfer portal on the basketball side, because why would any sport function the same way as the others? All right. Mentioned at the top through this raspiness that's happening. I'm down to more of a raspy now. I don't know. I've been sick for like a couple months, but raspy's better than nothing. But the big legislation passed actually yesterday or 2 days ago at this point in college football was that FBS coaches passed a rule saying that the official redshirt game number was now going to go from 4 to 9. Now, you'll notice a regular season is 12 games. 9 is a considerable amount of those 12 games. Look, I think what really happened here, if you ask me for an honesty kind of moment, is that college football coaches wanted a 5th year of eligibility across the board, like a blanket statement. Hey, let's just make this redshirt thing of the past, give out a 5th year and just call it good. But other sports didn't want that, and to have a 5th year of eligibility in its truest form, you'd had to go through the NCAA level. It would have to apply to all of the sports. That's different. Now, sport by sport have different red shirt rules. It's different because every sport is different. What makes sense for track does not make sense for softball, does not make sense for tennis, does not make sense for football, right? So what the football coaches, the FBS coaches could control, right, is what qualifies as a red shirt year. And they ultimately settled on 9 games, which is, again, 3/4 of the games in a season. And when that ruling hit earlier this week, gotta be honest, didn't think too terribly much about it, but clearly, according to Twitter, Boogie Johnson, who retweeted, I should say, with, clearly Boogie noticed, and he noticed a couple days later as well. And what I think is interesting here is, listen, Boogie played in he suited up for 6 games last season, and that is well over where the 4 marker would have been for a redshirt year. And when qualifying for a medical redshirt, that 4 games has kind of worked since it got instituted as a good bar of measurement. Boogie officially played in 6 games, played about 330 snaps, and therefore, when he did not get the med shirt or the medical red shirt, it was probably because he played more than the 4 games would have been for a typical red shirt, and so they didn't grant it out. It's half the season, whatever, right? What I think has to happen here, though, if they really wanted to push the issue, would be that a lawsuit would go towards the NCAA. And before you go, what Ainsworth's talking about suing people, this is not abnormal. There's a whole Diego Pavia suing on behalf, trying to get his years back last year, resulted in JUCO years not counting. There's talk about, does Trinidad Chambliss push the issue and sue for some sort of a way to get another year of eligibility for him to be able to play next fall for Ole Miss, and what that could mean for Mississippi, and as they sign Deuce Knight in the transfer portal, and yada yada yada. Every team's got some way this hits them, right? But in Boogie Johnson's case, suing the NCAA would be an interesting move because he could cite the rule that was just passed. If there were a 9-game redshirt rule when he filed for a medical redshirt, I I think it's hard to believe he wouldn't have gotten it. The same way I thought that it was hard to believe he would get it under the 4-game rule. I don't think it's impossible to think that the exact inverse would have happened had there been more games, right? And so I joke in comments about the NCAA not having a backbone when it comes to these court cases and them bending and buckling and changing things. But ultimately, what really happens is they just get overwhelmed. There are so many cases from so many athletes pushing so many things, trying to bend the rules in every single particular case right now. Boogie would not be the only guy suing for more eligibility. It feels like a lot of people seem to do that every year in this current issue or current iteration of college football. Boogie did essentially miss a year of college. He had a couple games this year without any real stats because the offense was different, adjusting the quarterbacks different, etc. Was finally like coming on before finally, or like finally like finding himself before ultimately having to sit out the rest of the year with an injury. Now, do I think Boogie's a pro? Yes. Do I think he needs a better chance to showcase that to help those odds? Also, yes. I see why he'd want the year of eligibility at Houston. Also, for its worth, getting signed up for what Houston's building right now would be pretty awesome, considering he was there for some of the darker days in the program before all the fun of the last 6 months. And as that's happening, I would point out that part of Boogie's case would also come down to his age. Boogie was born in September of 2003, and so my quick math says that he'll be 23 next fall. And before you say that's too old for this, too old for that, the average age of the Indiana Hoosiers who are playing in the national championship game this, I guess, technically next week, the average age of a Hoosier is 23 years old. Indiana has 47 players over the age of 22 years old, and they have several players that are 25 or turned 25 this past season. Boogie is well within his means to be old enough to be a college athlete. Again, had the rules been the way they are now changing to just a month ago, had they changed it then, he might have won his appeal for a medical redshirt in the first place. I think his case, at a very surface level, as a guy without a law degree, stands to reason. And I also think that we've seen enough times where NCAA just signs off on these and pass it or goes injunction and lets the kid play and they'll figure it out later. All those things seem to be happening enough that I think there's a chance that this would be worth pursuing or worth doing. Houston has added wide receivers in the transfer portal, and when the official word came down on Boogie's medical redshirt not going through, I myself commented that that probably means there's a shift in what the approach is for those wide receivers. They, since then, I went and got a 6'2" guy from Tech and a 6'2" guy from Oregon State, and those guys might not have signed up to play if there were going to be also Boogie Johnson out there catching footballs, and that's fine and dandy and fair. I would just point out that ultimately competition is what makes for the best football team, and the more of these talented guys you can throw in there, the better. I I think this would be worth pursuing from a personal standpoint. I would totally get wanting to play more ball if I'm Boogie, and I think that if you can add a talented football player to your team, I don't know why not. Now, I also get that pushing through legal things may be daunting, not worth it, cumbersome, whatever for others, and that yes, sure, fine, whatever. But I think that this might have squeaked open the door, and when Boogie tweeted this out with a it made me think that maybe he does agree, see the same thing, see some sort of a silver lining there as well. I just say all of that to say the door was closed, but I don't think it was locked, and that may be something to keep an eye on as things keep going. Now, other things to keep an eye on is that as the air quotes dead period of this transfer portal window close, we're going to look at a potential big couple of days for the Houston Cougars adding more talent. I don't know about wide receiver, but certainly at other positions in the transfer portal. I got my eye on a few defensive guys. I want to talk through what this could look like in just 1 second. Before we get that, today's show is brought to you by everybody's over at Game Time, because college football season is just, look, there's nothing like it. Tailgates, stadiums, right in the middle of it all, energy, bands, just too much fun happening. The frustrating part, though, is long queues, logins, prices jumping at checkout when you're looking for tickets. That's why Game Time gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets. Open the app, check the game. The prices go down as it gets closer. Zone deals, all in one pricing, so you don't have to guess what those extra fees will be if things jump at checkout or whatever. Great place getting the action. They've got concerts, theater, anything happening in and around the H or wherever you are. They've got it at Game Time. So take guesswork out of buying college football tickets to Game Time. Down the Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Turn to play this code Locked On College, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Cougs here. And thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day, and for making Locked On Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network in the world. If you're enjoying the conversation, you don't know what to say, we always said that down below. Tell us what your favorite candy is. We are monitoring that. But I also want to tell you, if you want to join the conversation, to get involved in the Everydayer program. I'm enjoying the Discord server and all access texting with me on the subtext thing. This is a really fun way to get more Locked On Cougs. So access to ad-free audio, invite to the members-only Discord server, all access episodes, and one-on-one texting, a merch store. LockedOnPodcast.com/everyday will give you more information. But if you just want to sign up right away, get in on the action, that's LockedOnCougs.supercast.com. I can't wait to talk to you more about the Houston Cougars. Look, Locked On Cougs is going to be given to you every day. But if you want more, that's the place to find a little bit more. So LockedOnPodcast.com/everydayer. All right. Speaking of more, Houston's going to be adding in the transfer portal, continuing to add. And officially, what was somewhat of an informal dead period is up. Now, this was a couple of days where technically off-campus recruiting and on-campus official visits were on a dead period. Logistically, this is mostly because there was an American Football Coaches Association convention, and they wanted coaches to feel like they could go to that without missing on-campus kinds of things. So official visits were not having unofficial, sure, official, not so much. And that was the 12th through the 14th. So on the 15th, it's back open. There was plenty of work being done by phone and virtually and through unofficial visits and stuff like that all over America, certainly in Houston as well. That's all much more kosher. This idea that, suddenly things shut down for the dead period, it's not really accurate. It was just kind of let's just call it that, I don't know, a pause on the speed of the action. There were certainly guys signing. Houston got a kicker, right? We've talked about some of that a little bit, but I would imagine that what you're about to see is another really, really fast moving 48 hours or so. The 15th and the 16th look to be pretty big days for Houston and others in the transfer portal. I guess the window officially closed on the 16th, but some of these playoff teams and the windows and coaching changes and things like that will extend some of this a little bit further for guys that need new homes and all of that. And right now, as it presently sits, and things will change a lot in the next 48 hours, like I mentioned, Houston has the 6th overall class, according to On3's consensus rankings or whatever, based on everything. That includes players going out and in to put together. 6th overall transfer portal class, combined with the 39th overall recruiting class. I'd point out in the high school recruiting ranks, Houston was one of 5 schools in the top 40 to have less than 20 kids in the class. And if you know about high school recruiting, sometimes it comes down to just being a numbers game. When schools sign 25 and 30 kids, that just gives them a little bit of different kind of a ranking almost because of that. Houston's per kid ranking was much higher than that, different based on different outlets, but an impressive year in pulling in talent, both in the high school recruiting ranks, Keyshawn Henderson being obviously the headliner, and in the transfer portal. I'd imagine that goes up some in the next 48 hours. I think Houston's going to have a pretty big 2 days. And with that said, there's a handful of names I'm monitoring, especially my trio Oregon guys. So Terrance Green, defensive tackle, 6'5", 330, originally from Sidewoods High School, but he's at Oregon. He hit the portal. On3, he's got him as a top 10 available name in the portal of any position, regardless of position. And at 6'5", 330, this is a guy that commands a double team on every kind of snap. He Khalil found Demarion Thomas on an interior run, goal line kind of situation would be just so much beef up front. I think that'd be a pretty impressive group. Obviously, they bring in other defensive linemen too, but this is another of these massive bodies. And frankly, massive bodies need blows and rotations. And so you should probably have a few of them if you want to rotate guys through and never have one not on the field. Would be interesting to see. An Oregon guy will also be interesting because those guys get a couple extra days because some of their windows started more like after their playoff run ended, right? Because they were playing in the playoffs and so on, right? Similarly, but different. How about that? Ashton Porter is a name I think you've got to keep an eye on. This is a guy that's 6'3", 290, also from the Houston area. He's got familiarity with the university because he was recruited by Houston early in his recruiting process at high school. He was recruited by Tulane and Fritz also. He's got connections to the staff. I think Ashton Porter, that is a name to keep an eye on because, frankly, he's also a position of need for Houston. You lose Eddie Walls. You haven't had a quite one-to-one replacement necessarily in the portal class yet. And when you got some up-and-coming young guys, having a plug-and-play type of body would help massage that transition from Eddie Walls into those younger guys you recruited from the high school ranks much more smoothly. Porter's big, 6'3", 290. That's a frame that's very much ready to play in this odd front with flexible hybrid positions on the outside. Really like what he could bring, and I really think there's some momentum there. So pay attention to the name Ashton Porter as well. I mentioned Oregon guys. That means we got to throw in Toby Hostrup. Toby Hostrup is technically a Houston guy as well. Went to Maid Creek, originally from London. The big thing here to me, 6'4", 240, long arms, big, strong athlete, great feet, great hands. Thing to me is this guy is only getting better. He's played football for all of 3 years. Didn't pick it up till a senior of high school. Again, not originally from this country. Didn't play a whole lot of football growing up. But you see potential there in the frame, the size, the athleticism. I think it's worth as much as any hometown. His hometown is, like I said, Houston as much as anything here in the States. I think seeing him come back home would be an interesting thing to do there too. I don't know if there's any sort of a group thing going on there or any sort of group think with the Oregon guys necessarily, but between losing their coordinators and the playoff run, they've got some more time to make decisions kind of. So keep an eye on where those guys are going. One guy that might make a decision quicker that also could come in and add some depth to the linebacker and probably compete to make some real snaps happen is Taj Butler. Taj Butler is originally from New Orleans, but played at Georgia Tech the last 2 years. He is a high highs, low kind of linebacker, but I think the staff feels like they could honestly kind of work and develop him into something where you see more of the high highs. I think he'd be a good positional fit as far as what Houston does with their interior linebackers. So keep an eye on Taj Butler, again, Louisiana kid, New Orleans kid. We know how Fritz and company feel about those. And I guess if we're going outside the state of Texas, a guy originally from outside the state of Texas that is currently, I guess just recently wrapped up playing at Texas State that I really think you need to keep an eye on because I keep seeing things clicked on, seeing his name work out and things. Ryan Nolan, not to be confused, Nolan Ryan. Ryan Nolan's a 5'10", 180-pound corner. Again, another position of need, in my opinion, for Houston. Had a really strong year at Texas State. Played over 350 snaps in coverage and was only thrown at 26 times. He's on guys like White on Rice. I think that's a really, really good get for Houston. They can keep him in the state of Texas. I do think Ryan Nolan will be at a Power 4 school this year. So I'd imagine Houston's bidding with other people, so to speak, on him. But keep an eye out there. He's certainly a guy that can make the jump. And I think when you see what Houston's done with their DBs the last 2 years, almost regardless of coordinator, I think guys would line up to play for Fritz in a heartbeat based on what the production from those defensive backs have been at Houston. So keep an eye on those handful of guys, which probably means there'll be others as well, because that's how these things tend to go. The portal will be fast, and frankly, it'll make your head spin the next couple of days. So I'm going to do my best to get stuff out to you on social media, do my best to get stuff out to you on Locked On Cougs. Hit subscribe, hit follow, all those things to make sure you're keeping up with it. And obviously, when big things happen, we get to as fast as we can. It is a big weekend, though, for transfer portal kind of things, and it really starts Thursday morning. So keep an eye on all of that. Speaking of transfer portal, big news in the transfer portal is actually might have been the biggest news that's going on in basketball right now. So I want to talk about what that looks like in just 1 second. But first, Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Cougs here. And look, I think that as much fun as the football transfer portal is right now, because it's the present tense transfer portal, there's a really strong argument that the more impactful change might have been what they just passed on the basketball side of things. We opened the episode talking about how every sport is going to have different rules for what is and isn't a red shirt. For instance, in basketball, you can't step foot on the floor and maintain a red shirt in a season, right? The basketball's transfer portal window got dramatically adjusted in a way that, frankly, feels like it makes more sense to me. So instead of being at the end of your personal season, the official opening of the window is the first 15 days following the title game. So, and it's effective immediately. So presently, 2026, the 15-day transfer portal window will go from April 7th to April 21st. Previously, I should actually add that any head coaching change is going to trigger a 15-day window 5 days after the new coach is hired. There's also some more jargon and clarification about if it takes a school a long time to pick a coach, it'll just trigger the 15 days anyway. So that like they can't just like hold you in purgatory waiting on the next one, right? And so on. And I like this rule a lot because what you saw last year was the teams that didn't play as many games as Houston, because Houston got all the way to the national title game, had that portal window open earlier and were active earlier, were making moves earlier. And look, I look at Houston's roster. We're going to pull back up my handy dandy chart here, which is where guys are on the roster. You'll notice we've already added Arafan John and Ken Lozier for next season. But with losing Emmanuel, Khalifa, and Milos, and Ramon, before you even get into does Kingston go pro, does Chris go pro, etc., does JoJo, anybody, you're going to need more roster spots. And do I think they can fill some of that in? I think I should say that they have the two signees presently in the class 2026. I think they get one or two more. I know they're really after one or two more that are kind of going to delay their decisions a little bit more to see how things shake out. And frankly, Kingston going pro might help one of them decide, like those kinds of things, right? Could all shake out good for Houston and getting new guys. But anyway, regardless, just from a numbers perspective, when you look at that, Houston needs at least two more players to get their typical that, Sampson always likes to run out there with 14 and keep that one spot open just in case. They need at least two guys to get to that if no one else goes pro. And if you had one or two guys going pro, you're going to need two more plus two more. And that's a lot of talent to be looking at in the high school ranks. It's a big high school class. It probably stands to reason that they're going to look into that transfer portal, much like they did for Milos Duzin, much like they did for Khalifa Saka, much like they did for LJ Cryer, or once upon a time, Damian Dunn as well. I think that that's kind of where one of those rotational pieces, if not starters, may come next season. And look, this transfer portal window moving from whenever season's ended to April 7th as the start date doesn't mean it's going to necessarily get rid of any guys throwing their names in the hat. Guys will announce that I intend on entering the transfer portal as early as they want to, frankly, even though they can't formally or legally enter until April, right? Second, this is going to do some to help, some of the more concrete and actual signings from happening. There will still be some level of tampering and early access and early conversations. There's only so much you can do to actually prevent that, and a lot of that is unpreventable. Agents talk, people talk, friends talk. The circles are only so small. There's so many people and so many circles to keep an eye on. The NCAA is not going to actually be able to shut down all of that. But we saw last year, like Houston had, for what feels like the blink of an eye, Pops Isaac join very quickly in the transfer portal, and he was on the Houston Cougar roster for a hot second, right? Houston will not back down from adding someone in the transfer portal if that's what they think they need to do. Pop Isaacs, for example, is going to join. We thought Miles using Michael Pro last year. And what this does is it at least pushes the official formal signing and decision making until later. And Houston last year was behind the 8 ball in some of these signings and things like that in transfer because they were coaching and winning and playing games. It doesn't feel right to punish the teams from access to talented players because they won games with the talented players they had before, right? So I don't know, frankly, how the high school class finishes out for Houston necessarily. I don't know necessarily who's going to be on and off the roster. I don't think they'll have anyone jump into the transfer portal, but I always get surprised by those kind of things. It happens. What I do know, though, is that Houston will have as good a shot as anyone come April 7th, 8th, 9th to pick up on people because transfers to Houston, like Miles Uzan, like LJ Cryer, like Khalifa Sacco this year, have had a ton of success. And I think that the culture, the program, the winning, the environment are all things that people would want to be involved in. And getting a fair shot at finding talented pieces in a year that I think are going to need to add some is going to be important. And so we're in the football portal right now. We're talking about that right now. That's every day. It'll be, frankly, every 10 minutes, it feels like, for the next 48 hours. But I think that basketball window is going to be the one that we're talking about in a very similar way throughout a lot of April. Not to spoil the surprise and what's coming around the corner in content, but I do think that once you kind of solidify and wrap up the high school class, you're going to have guys declaring to go pro, guys entering you're going to be looking to fill spots then too. And so we'll see where the needs are and what the options are, and we'll be doing it at the same time as everyone else. And that's really, really important. Now, what else is really important is that you subscribe to Locked On Coogs and keep this thing going. We are the most listened to Houston Cougar podcast out there, but we are not. How many knots? How many negatives I could do there? We're not going to stop at that. Okay, we're going to keep growing, getting bigger. Let's climb up the charts, bigger than everything. Let's keep this thing growing. Hit subscribe to help us get there. Locked On Cougs is the primary Locked On podcast network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.